So Genesis chapter 4, that's where we are. Life in exile, life in exile. Alrighty, before we start, let's ask the Lord's blessing. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that we can come. One more Sunday, one more week to adore, worship, and follow you and be instructed by you. We thank you for your word. We thank you for Genesis 4 and what you have revealed and kept for us there. We ask you, Lord, that you will bless this time in the name of Jesus. Amen. So chapter 4 of Genesis. Let's read it together. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Again she gave birth to his brother Abel. And Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering he had not regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desires for you, but you must master it. Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, What is Abel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from your face I will be hidden, and I will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. So the Lord said to him, Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, so that no one finding him will slay him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael became the father of Methusael, and Methusael became the father of Lamech. Lamech took to himself 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in the tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who played the lyre and pipe. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Nehemah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice. You wives of Lamech, give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. The men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So, Genesis 4. We are on this side, east side of the garden. We are in exile. Really, exile starts nice. Started in Genesis 3 with God casting out Adam and Eve from the garden, and now we are in the land of exile, outside of the garden, outside of the reach to the tree of life and of the immediate unmitigated presence with the Lord without any sin. Perfection is lost, sin is present. And what we see now in Genesis 4 is a new chapter. We see a new world. We are now in a new world, so to speak. We left the garden. We are outside of it. And what we see is the first family, the first bigger family without just a marriage. What we see is the first sin in a family, the first demonstration of unrighteous anger, the first act of murder, which is the result of the unrighteous anger, the first result, as we can say, the first time that we see death, what was the result of sin, or at least physical death. And it is the first that we also see the first act of polygamy, the first time that a man took 2 wives. It is noted in Genesis 4. And the first act of revenge by Lamech. And probably several other things. But we see all this time, this is the first time that these things appear. At the same time, we also see we have another side, another table of first things, and we see the first births. The first child ever born was Cain. And of course we think, right, we don't just read chapter 4 separated from anything else. Right? It is part of this story, Genesis, of course, but it is part of chapter 1 to 11, the primeval story. And it comes after Genesis 3. So, of course, as we read the Bible, we keep this all in tension, all in mind. And in Genesis 3, there was Genesis 2, Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply. So we read all that, and we come now to this point. It's the first birth ever to happen. And it's interesting, it happens outside of the garden, outside of the garden. Not outside of Eden yet. Cain gets outside of Eden and is cast away. So we are outside of, well, anyway, the first birth, we see the first act of worship, the first sacrifices offered to the Lord. The first city was built. We have the first appearance of shepherds. I say shepherds, where do you see that? You see in verse 2 that I think it's very unfortunate. I mean, no translation, so I think it's really unfortunate. No translation translates the keeper of flock as shepherd. That is the one word used for shepherds. And I think it's connected with the when you think about translations, little rabbit trail, but when you think about translations, there is a history of translations. And in the English world, the KJV has been fundamental. It's kind of the foundation for all the other translations in the English. And so many times, translations kind of follow a tradition of translations. And the KJV was the first one to translate as keeper of the flock, and I think that's what influenced the others. But it is a shepherd. This is making this contrast. For the first time, we have a shepherd of flocks, and we have a worker of the ground. And why is that important? It's because we know the shepherds in the Bible are pretty important. So anyway, shepherd, we have the first shepherd. We have the first appearance of music. For the first time, someone built music. Instrumental music, pipe and liar. And so we have for the first time, we show that it shows here that there is humanity is creating things. And it's kind of an idea of society, civilization is happening. Lyre, pipe, there are the forger of implements of bronze and iron, so we have forgers as well. So humanity is expanding as a society as well. And then we had, for the first time, someone calling upon the name of the Lord. The very end of Genesis 4. Important to see that because it is connected with the seed, the other offspring that God gave to Eve after she basically lost her first two children. She lost the second, Abel, by the hands of the first, and she lost the first by his own sin, because of his own sin. So the one was killed, the other were disqualified and cast away. And now we are left wondering, okay, what about Genesis 3:15? What about that promise? That there will be a seed of the woman who will defeat the enemy. So Eve gets the third child. And then it is from that line that people start calling on the name of the Lord. Important. So what I thought to do this today, as I was studying the text, it just kind of the structure of the narrative, it kind of became clear. So when you approach narrative, right, you approach it in a way that is different, for example, from the epistles. Okay, epistles are developing an argument usually. And so you trace the argument, you follow the argument. The narrative instead is tracing a story. And so you approach it in a slightly different way. And what you see in a story, there is usually an introduction, there is the plot, and there is the conclusion. And in the plot you have the beginning of the plot, the middle of the plot, so the beginning of the plot is just telling you what is happening. And then you have other components. So I wanted to look at together how we see this pattern here in Genesis 4. That there is a problem, there is a tension that has been built, and there is a resolution. At one point, we are left wondering what is happening, what will happen. I think we should feel that because it's built into it. So let's read it together. And you have this little pyramid. I don't know. This little drawing with the verses. And every time you see a little movement, that is a new development of the story. So when it first is flat, then you have the first in a little bit. And so we'll see that. So the beginning will be the setting of the stage. This is the scene. It's setting the scene. What we're dealing with. So for the first two verses, basically telling us this is what we are. This is what the scene. So now the man knew his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. Okay, she said, okay, so basically saying this is now he had a first child and he has a second child, and this is where he starts the whole thing. And he's giving important information. The Cain was given with the help of the Lord. And it was a man child. It was a male child. And again, remember Genesis 3, the promise. It will be through your offspring. And so Adam and Eve know that. And for 9 months, they did not know what the baby was. Male, female, it's a boy, it's a girl. They didn't know. So they waited. It's like, is this now the promise? Is God going to fulfill the promise now? It's a boy. Well, he will be called Cain. God, the Lord Yahweh helped me. I got him with Yahweh, with the help of the Lord. Okay, so we get the first child, and then we have the second child, and then you see basically the story skips I don't know how many years. It doesn't focus on how they were reared and how they grew up. It says, look, she gave also birth to another child, and now it just gives the information that we need to know. Abel was a shepherd, and Cain was a worker of the ground. How many years? 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 100? So far we do not know. And Cain, notice the firstborn is what? A work of the ground. And what is he doing? I mean, he's following in the footsteps of his father. Because in Genesis 3:23, the Lord God has sent away Adam from the Garden of Eden to do what? To cultivate the ground. The same words, to work the ground, to work the ground. So Adam was a farmer, and he teaches his firstborn to be a farmer. But the secondborn is a shepherd. Okay, that's the scene. That's setting the plot, is setting the stage. We have some information. Now what will happen? So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Abel on his part also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord, so now we have a positive, we have just a sequence. That happened, and now some information. The Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering, positive, but for Cain and for his offering he had no regard, negative. Like, okay, wait. Now there's a little bit of tension. Why? They both brought the offering, they both worshipped, but now there is a little bit of tension here. One was appreciated, one was pleased. The Lord was pleased with one, the Lord was not pleased with the other. First tension. The tension is building. So you see, we are there in the 3 to 5. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Tension arises. Next move, then there is a move. Then the Lord, verse 6 and 7, then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will your countenance be lifted up? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it." New information. Okay, so far we know he's angry. Is this a righteous anger? Is this a sinful anger? What is going on? And now we have the Lord dealing directly with him and warning him. It's very interesting. The Lord doesn't wait. I mean, he goes, he warns, he deals with them. And we have new information. Where is the information? Sin is after you. Sin is after you. It's crouching at the door like a lion. And its desire is for you, to devour you, but you must master it. Okay, you need to do what your father failed to do. Back in Genesis 3. You must master over sin. Do not let sin master over you. So the tension is building. Now we are left wondering. Is Cain going to master over sin? Or is sin going to master over Cain? Then verse 8. Tension is building. Cain told Abel his brother. He spoke with Abel his brother. And it came about, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. And here the tension has reached its peak. At this point we see the fruit of sin. And we see that Cain did not master sin. Sin mastered Cain. And the result was the first murder in the history of mankind. And it was a fratricide. A brother killing his own brother, his own blood. And so the scene and now the narrative has reached the peak. Like, this is the moment where we do not know what is happening next. One is dead, the other is alive. The Lord had warned him, had warned Cain. The firstborn, who perhaps could have been the hope from Genesis 3:15, that has been conceived, has been born through the help of the Lord himself, is the one that fails completely. And so we're left wondering, what will happen after this? One child is left, he's a murderer. So from now on, then there is the resolution. That is called resolution. So the climax of the story, now we are in the resolution after this. And then the Lord approaches Cain, and he asks him, "Where is your brother?" And we know he's like, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Response of, "I don't care. What are you trying? What do you want from me, Lord?" And so there is the curse. Very interesting now that the curse falls directly upon Cain. Now you are cursed from the ground. So the resolution is actually a sad resolution as well, because the sin of Cain brought upon curse. And we were hoping for it, and in Genesis 3, we were hoping for a change of direction, for a new direction of the story. But we are again now under curse and sin and the failure of man. And God needs to deal with sinner again and again. And so he says, "You're cursed from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your own hand." And the curse is twofold. When you cultivate the ground, it no longer yields its strength to you, and you will be a wanderer on the earth. Well, he was already in exile, but now is cast completely away from the presence of the Lord. So that is the part after the number 8. It's falling down. That is verses 9 to 12. I mean, the whole section is 9 to 15, but the first is 9 to 12. And then we have another little movement. It's like something else. That the punishment that Cain says is too great for me. And we have a new information. There is a mist of judgment God brings. A blessing. There is grace in the midst of judgment. Verse 15, the Lord said, "Okay, your judgment is, you're worried about those that will come and kill you." And so he says, vengeance will be taken on the one who potentially will kill Cain sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain so that no one finding him will slay him. So there is judgment, there is punishment, and then in that same moment, there is also grace. And then there is the resolution. So that was the completion of the story. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So just see the structures. We have the plot, the scene is put, and we have information for what is going to happen. We have the tension is building with, first seems everything okay, they both worship, but then there is something that happens. And the Lord is pleased with one, is not pleased with the other. Like, oh, strange, what is that about? And Cain gets really angry. Okay, and the Lord deals with him, and he warns him, and he says, sin is crouching on the door. I say, okay, what is going to happen? And then, Sin won. Cain failed. And we have blood on the earth. Rather than having rain that waters the ground, there is blood that waters the ground. And then the resolution starts. After that, what would the Lord do? Punishment and a sign of grace, and then the conclusion that is, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, which interestingly means the land of wandering. So he was a wanderer. That was the second part of the curse. He will be a wanderer on the earth. And although he settles somewhere, he settles in the land of the wanderers. And where it is? East of Eden. Where have we left in Genesis 3? The Adam and Eve were east of the garden, outside of the garden, but still in the land of Eden. But where we are left now, it's east of Eden. So see the movement. It is farther and farther away from the presence of the Lord, from where God dwells. And as we see the consequence of sin is to lead farther and farther and farther away from the presence of the Lord. And there is division with has no more fellowship with his family. And it makes the point that those who reject God, they don't have a stable place. They will never have a stable place. They will keep on wandering on the earth. So at the end of Genesis 3, we were hoping for something different. At the end of Genesis 4, at least at this first part, we are left disappointed with Cain. He was in exile, gets even more exiled. But then, there is a note of hope at the end of Genesis 4. There is the genealogy of Cain, and the idea that Adam knew his wife Eve, and now Cain knew his wife. So there is still, amidst of that, amidst of judgment, amidst of sin, amidst of a fallen world, there is still procreation. And as someone has said, every child is God's yes to mankind. And as long as there will be children on the earth, as long as there will be conceived children, it is a sign that God has not done yet with mankind. And this is a sign that he has not done with mankind. Cain knew his wife. If there is barrenness, we have no hope. But Cain knew his wife. Even sinful Cain. And we get to the first city. You can trace the idea of cities in Genesis. Can be very interesting. And then we have Lamech. I mean, we have really what starts happening here is the tracing two different seeds, two different races of mankind, two different offsprings. The offspring of Cain, and then there will be the offspring of Seth. The offspring of Cain that builds cities, and then who is characterized really by the sin of the father, by the sin of the father of the race. Cain was a murderer, and then what is the last man that we read in this genealogy? Lamech, a murderer. Generations after the first sin of Cain. So his sin characterizes his race. Murderers, killers, vengeful, angry. And he says, if Lamech was, if Cain was avenged seven times, Lamech will be avenged 77-fold. I don't know if you ever thought about this connection, but when Peter asks Jesus, how many times do I need to forgive brother, do I need to forgive 7 times? He says, no, 77 times. I think he was doing this connection. That the church, that the people of God needs to be characterized by forgiveness, not by vengeance. It is a sign of completeness. It's not like, oh, I reached 490 times. Now I can get after you. It's not, as long as you will live, you keep on forgiving. This is what characterizes you. And it is different, so you see that the church then it becomes the seed of, it is in the seed of the seed of the womb. We are characterized by our head, our Father, Christ, who is forgiving. And so we are to forgive one another. But here, the father of the other race, and the other race, those that are unrighteous, are characterized by vengeance, by unforgiveness. Lamech kills only because he was wounded by this, because a boy stroked him. And he boasts about it, right? So one is characterized by anger, and the other is not. And I said there is a note of hope. What is the note of hope? Is verse 25 and 26. Okay, because yes, Cain knew his wife, but wow, what kind of family he brought about, a family of murderers. But then Adam knew his wife again, and now this is another child, Seth, and she knows, she's hoping for this. God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel. Another offspring. So we will be following then this one offspring that will have children. Now when you compare Genesis 4 and Genesis 5, the interesting contrast is that for the genealogy of Cain, we don't see any age, any years, right? We don't know how many years these people lived. It just gives the name and this would happen and this, and then he had this. But when we go to Seth, then there will be instead the years will be given, and there is a focused. There is a greater focus in it. Even Seth lived 807 years, as if you see Genesis 5:7, after he became Father Enosh and had other sons and daughters. So the idea that he was actually procreating more. So with Cain, we only have one child that is pointed out. With Seth, instead, we have the first child, the child that is most important, and then it says, but he had even more. Which should make us think about Genesis 2. Fill the earth, procreate. So it will be then through this line that there will be the blessing of the Lord, and not through another line. Anyway, so that's the story of Genesis 4, the tension, the resolution, and also. If you compare Genesis 4 with Genesis 3, it's incredible to see how many parallels there are between Cain and Adam. So if you have the handout, just flip page. And look at the parallels. So there is, as I said, Adam works the ground and Cain is the worker of the ground. Adam sins, which results in death, and Cain sins, which results in Abel's death. In chapter 3, verse 9, God summons Adam, where are you? And in Genesis 4, verse 9, he summons Cain, where are you? And then he asks, summons is he calls, okay. And then he asks, where are you? And he asks, where is your brother? So it is a direct question. Adam trying to conceal his sin. When he answers to the Lord, he doesn't confess anything. He starts blaming Eve. He's trying to conceal his sin, and Cain does the same. He doesn't confess anything. He just says, "Who am I, my brother's keeper? It wasn't my responsibility." And so they're both characterized by trying to conceal sin rather than confession. God answers, "What is that you have done, and what is that you have done?" Then there is it follows a curse that for Adam was specifically on the ground. And I said, interestingly, instead, the curse for Cain is on him directly. And who else did God curse directly in Genesis 3? The serpent. Was the only one that God directly cursed in Genesis 3. Because the other was the childbirth and the ground. But here, instead, God curses directly Cain. Which I think should make us think that the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, that there will be enmity between the two. There is as I said last time, there is a both. So the term seed has a corporate identity and individual. In other words, it's like sheep. You can say sheep, there is one sheep, there are 10,000 sheep. Right? So you don't know exactly. And the seed works in that sense as well. It can refer to a corporate entity. So in Genesis 12, and 15 will refer to Israel as a whole entity. It can refer to one individual. And in Genesis 3, it is a both and, because there is a constant enmity that goes between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And we see in Genesis 4, the enmity is already there. Cain and Abel. So it's a spiritual seed. Those that are characterized by the serpent, those whose father is the serpent, those whose father is, and those who are spiritually instead righteous. But then there is an individual seed, which is the one that will strike the serpent, and whose the serpent will strike back, which is the Messiah Christ. So they're both happening at the same time. And the hope is through the individual seed that eventually will bring the victory for the big seed, for everybody. So when we move to Genesis 4, we see the enmity that is playing out in history. And it's a real enmity, although there is a spiritual component to it, as real effect in the world. Because it is a enmity that has to do with fight and blood. There will be murder and kill, and it will bring strife. So Cain is cursed as the serpent was, which tells us Cain although he was the firstborn, he wasn't the one through whom the blessing will come. Instead, he was of the seed of the serpent, not of the woman. He wasn't a true seed of the woman, but a seed of the serpent. And this actually starts also a new pattern that we'll see in the rest of Genesis, namely that the firstborn, they're not always the ones that get the blessing. That God works in strange ways. And the way that he works is often counterintuitive. He doesn't use the one that the firstborn was the most important. It was the child that will get double of the inheritance, and it was supposed to be the one that will keep on the name, will keep the line of the family. It was very, very important. But God doesn't use the firstborn here. He will use the thirdborn. And it's the same. When you see in Genesis, it's incredible. When you also see at the patriarchs, at the end, how does Genesis end? In Genesis 49. With Jacob giving the blessing to his 12 children, and the firstborn doesn't get the blessing, doesn't really get much. Then the other two, they were also violent, so they don't get much. But it's the fourth one, Judah, who actually gets the blessing. that through him there will come a ruler to whom all the nations will bow down and worship. It's not the firstborn, it's the fourth. And interestingly, the blessing of the firstborn in the children of Jacob will actually will get down to Joseph. Because the firstborn, as I said, one of the blessings for the firstborn was inheriting twice as much as the others. And Joseph, what does Joseph get? He gets 2 children, and they're both blessed by Jacob. So the blessing of the firstborn gets to Joseph. And it's also said in 2 Kings 5, it talks about that. That Joseph gets the firstborn blessing, the blessing of the firstborn. Anyway, that was a derail. Then, so God cursed directly Cain, and then there is God's grace amidst punishment in Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman. However, he shall kill you, and you shall probably kill him as well. And the same here. There is God's grace amidst punishment. And finally, Adam is exiled from the garden, and Cain is exiled from Canaan. So there are so many parallels between the two. And the point is, once again, that Cain, Adam's firstborn, follow his father's footsteps. And he ends up losing to sin, giving up to sin, giving in to sin, and be exiled and losing up the land that was given to him. So, any questions on this point? Yeah, elaborate on verse 25. Adam knew his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. Do you have something specific that you want me to elaborate, or? Yes, I was wondering. Yeah, the name Seth, if means anything. Seth, it does means, it comes from the verb to appoint. Sit, to appoint. So that is what she says. What Eve says is basically an explanation of why she called her son Seth. God has appointed me. That is the connection. Has appointed me another offspring. So that's why she called him Seth. Appointed. Yeah. So you probably wonder, perhaps, what was the reason why Abel's sacrifice was accepted and Cain's wasn't? Because so far there isn't much clue. It seems like there isn't much clue in the text. There's only Cain. It came about in the course of time. Cain brought an offering to the Lord and a fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, brought of the firstling of his flock and on their fat portions, and the Lord had regarded for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain, for his offering, he had no regard. What's the deal here? Well, there has been usually given 3 explanations, and so I present those, and I'll tell you what I believe, what I have landed, which I think it comes here. It's clear from the text. The first is the idea that just a couple of thoughts at this point. When he says that Cain brought an offering to the Lord, that could really much convey the idea that they built an altar, that they went somewhere to sacrifice, that they knew that there was a place that they had to go somewhere to offer sacrifices, which is an idea that we will see again and again, even in the rest of the Pentateuch, with the Exodus and the fact that the people of Israel had to bring the offering somewhere to offer to the Lord. And it came about in the course of time. It's really at the end of the days. At the end of the days. It's like they had an idea that there was a right time and a right place to offer sacrifices to the Lord. Something that perhaps their parents had taught them, and something that they had gathered from chapter 3, when the Lord, verse 21, when the Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. The idea of a sacrifice that happened to cover the unrighteousness of Adam and Eve. It's like God sacrificed an animal, for without blood there is no forgiveness of sins. Hebrews 9. So anyway, it could very much kind of hint toward that direction. But what is the deal between Cain and Abel? Why one offering was accepted and the other wasn't? So one idea is that Cain brought the wrong kind of sacrifice. Abel brought an animal and sacrificed an animal. Well, Cain brought the fruit of the ground, which had been cursed by God. So it was at the same time he brought a wrong offering because he didn't bring an animal, a sacrifice, and also because he brought the sacrifice. He brought the fruit of that which was accursed. And again, the whole disposition say that the idea of Hebrews 9:22, that without blood there is no forgiveness of sins, and so the right sacrifice is blood. I personally don't think that is what is happening here. The second idea is that he offered with the wrong heart. There wasn't faith, in other words. Cain offered without faith. If you go to Hebrews 11, the author of Hebrew picks up on this, on this scene, on this moment, this event, and in verse 4. No, this is Romans. Like, that's strange. Hebrews 11. Yes, in verse 4 it says, "By faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testifying about his gifts. And through faith, though he's dead, he still speaks." Right? In Genesis 4, this says that God said that his blood is speaking to me. And here says, and this is beautiful, it says, although he was the first martyr, right? That's what we could say, the first martyr. Because what Cain was angry about is that God had regarded for him because of his offering. And so it was the right kind of worship of God that brought anger to the other brother, and he killed him because of that. So we could say he was the first martyr. And although he was dead thousands of years ago, the authors of Hebrews says, he still speaks. His faith still speaks. One act of worship, and that still speaks to this day. So that would be the idea. Abel offered this sacrifice by faith, Cain did not. And I think yes, but more. I think there is more nuance than that, which would be the third view, the third idea, that it is here in the text. Notice that verse 3 and 4, the difference. Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Okay? Just stop there. He brings an offering from the fruit of the ground. Now, this offering, I don't think was a wrong offering per se. First of all, yes, God had cursed the ground, but he then, at the end of Genesis 3, he sends Adam to work the ground. So why would that be sinful to do what God had sent Adam to do? I don't see why. So I don't think that's the case. The second is that in Leviticus 2, we have actually the regulation of grain offerings from the ground to the Lord. In Genesis 2:14, when he talks about grain offering of early ripened things to the Lord, That is exactly the offering that Cain brought to the Lord. And there is something that God says it is a pleasing aroma to him. So I don't see that the offering in itself was wrong. Okay, so Cain offers the fruit of the ground, But what does Abel offers? Abel, on his part, also brought, and now is the difference. Can you see it? The firstlings of his flock, the firstborn of his flock. He brings the firstborn, and their fat. And their fat? He brings like the first and the fat. Why? Leviticus 5. Oh, I'm sorry, Leviticus 3. I had the wrong thing. Leviticus 3, the peace offering. So, and what is the peace offering? The peace offering is just an offering that you bring to the Lord just to commune together, to enjoy time together. It wasn't because of sin, it was just, let's commune together, Lord. And I bring this as a worship. So the peace offering in Leviticus 3. If his offering is a sacrifice or peace offering, if he's going to offer out of the herd, whether male or female, he shall offer it without defect before the Lord. Okay, now go to verse 6. But if his offering for a sacrifice or peace offering to the Lord is from the flock, okay, herd will be cows and bulls. Flock, it tells you what it is. He shall offer it male or female without defect. If he's going to offer a lamb for his offering, then he shall offer it before the Lord, and he shall lay on the head of his offerings, lay it before the tent of meeting. Verse 9: from the sacrifice of peace offering, he shall bring as an offering by fire to the Lord its fat, the entire fat, tail which he shall remove close to the backbone, and the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails. Fat. On the two kidneys with the fat that is on them, which is on the loins. Then the priest, verse 11, shall offer it up in smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire to the Lord. Okay, the word fat, it's repeated several times here. And go to verse 16. The priest shall offer them up in smoke on the altar as food, an offering by fire for a soothing aroma. All fat is Yahweh's, is the Lord's. So when Genesis 4 tells us that Abel brought the firstborn and all the fat, I think we should see the distinction. He brings a kind of what later on will be called a peace offering. He just wants to commune with the Lord. He delights in worshiping God, and he wants to offer the best of the best of the best. It is an idea like in 2 Samuel 24 when David sins and he does the census. He sins and the Lord sends the plague. Then he goes and buys a field, which eventually will be the field for the temple. But he buys a field, and the owner of the field tells him, I will give it to you for free. But this is the response of David. 2 Samuel 24:24. This is his response. No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price, for I will not offer burnt offering to the Lord my God, which costs me nothing. We don't want to be cheap with the Lord. We want to offer the best of the best of the best. And this is, I think, what is going on here. Cain didn't bring the best of the best of the best. He had something, maybe he had a surplus, and he says, well, maybe this will pleases you. It was as one called tokenism. It just, I give you a token, maybe you'll be pleased. But what Abel did was a true, genuine, heartfelt, costly offering. He gave the best to his God. So I think that's what is happening here. And with that, we have two questions.
So, could Cain's offering and Abel's offering be considered like foreshadowing the more expansive rules given in Leviticus?
Good question. Can Cain and Abel's offering be considered as foreshadowing that then the sacrifices that will be ruled or organized later on? The way I will answer is the way I see when God gave the statutes and commandments to Israel, they did not come up out of nowhere. It seems that they had an idea of sacrifice, they had an idea of Sabbath, they have an idea of unleavened bread or stuff, something like that. It wasn't something brand new. And it looked like something that was passed from generation to generation to generation. And then at the end, when it comes at that time, he regulates more strictly. So I don't know if it will be foreshadowing necessarily. I think they were just historically present right there. There was always this idea that that sinful man needs to sacrifice something to God. And this, we're talking about the righteous line from Adam and Eve and then all the rest. Does that answers? Okay. Lonnie, do you have a question? Good question. The question is verse 6 and 7. Is there a case where God is providing perhaps the opportunity for Cain not to sin? Would you say that's right? The short answer is yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. It's an instance, that is why he actually goes to him and he warns him. So we see that the warning of God have the purpose of keeping from sin. That's the very idea of the warn. Be watchful. So 1 Corinthians 10:13 is one of those. I mean, the idea that no temptation's overtaken you. There is no common to man. And here was a temptation that his father had felt of pursuing sin. And where Adam had failed, Cain was supposed to instead succeed. Why? Because God says you must master it, which is the commandment, the creation commandment given to mankind to rule over all creation. Sorry? Oh, what kind of attribute it is? I don't know exactly to link to some attribute. Yeah, I don't know. It just shows that God is not away from his people. That he is not just waiting for us to sin so that he can judge us. He doesn't want that. He's actually more pleased that we fight and we conquer sin rather than falling into it. And he wants to help us. So the warnings do have that. Yeah. Okay, 10:02. We gotta go.